Hey, thanks for tuning in to That Husband podcast. And today's episode, we have the privilege of being joined by Karabo Rasebitse. And we speak about just the privilege of what it means and looks like to have generational input in preparing young men to become husbands. Secondly, we speak about just how hectic the first 2 years of marriage tend to be for a lot of couples and how people don't speak about that. And therefore, lots of marriages don't make it past the 2 years. And then lastly, we speak about the psychology of the man, psychology of the husband, and how he should, in fact, invest so much in taking care of himself in that regard so that he can show up to be a better man, be a better husband. All of that in today's episode. Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband podcast with me, Black Newborn. Here we are husbands who aren't where we want to be, but certainly are not where we used to be. We are imperfect, always failing forward, trying to know better so that we can do better. Hey, what's up? Welcome to That Husband podcast with me, Black Newborn. This is where husbands try to know better so that we can do better. Before we get into this episode, we want to thank you again so much for supporting us and the work that we're doing here. And you can support us and continue doing so by buying us coffee. There's a link in the comment section that you can click and you can buy us as many coffees as you want. It keeps us energized so that we can keep on making the content here. And secondly, if you're looking for a face, a voice for your next event, do consider booking me as your MC, and that's at booking@blacknewborn.com. That's at booking@blacknewborn.com. The husband that's sitting across the table from me today is a doctor. Despite what he says. Karabo Rasebitse.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
What's up, brother?
No, all good, man, all good.
Good, man. Thanks for pulling through, bro.
No, it's only a pleasure, man.
Yeah. Man, it's really great. I'm excited to get into the topic. As I was, scouring the internet, I bumped into a paper you wrote. That we'll get into.
Okay.
I might butcher the title, but the topic was very interesting. But before we get into that and some of the things we're going to speak about, we are compiling this book.
Okay.
And we're trying to put names of husbands in there and their stories. Husbands who are failing forward, who are no superheroes, who are taking responsibility for the call over their lives as husbands. And they just, again, men who wake up every time they fall and they take it a day at a time, and we want to give this book to husbands who don't have community and other brothers that they're walking with. But we also want to make it available to younger guys who are afraid of getting married, who probably don't have good examples of marriage or husbands, or had, bad ones, and therefore they repelled by marriage and even getting into the institution. So we ask our guests to give us two names of husbands who inspired you to get married, or who currently inspire you to stay married.
I think I've got two.
Yeah.
One of them is my dad and my uncle.
Sure.
So those are the two men that played a very significant role into shaping the kind of man that I get to become today.
Yeah. Sure.
So I think even on my thesis, I reflect quite a lot on my father as well, because he played quite a very significant role in terms of fathering. So those are the two significant men that I can confidently say.
Sure.
They've shaped the man that I am today.
Yeah. That's great, man. What particularly about your father? I think I saw a picture of you with him and your son.
Yeah.
I mean, for black men to just see that picture, man, was such an encouraging and inspiring thing. What is it about your dad that you would...
the hardships. I think the hardships of life and the challenges that came with marriage and having to raise 3 kids. And this last weekend actually, we had a family engagement. Just a token of saying thank you. We had a Thanksgiving at home, And just engaging with that man and just learning certain African traditional things from him and collaborating with him as well. That for me was a very significant point. And I think one of the things that we maybe don't discuss quite regularly as men is the importance of just hearing your father say, I love you.
Yeah, man.
Connecting with that person on that level.
Yeah.
For me, it plays a very significant role.
Sure.
So when we speak about certain gender roles within an African household, within an African man, he shaped that, And in terms of my uncle, he was more of the modern one.
Sure.
The person that I knew in terms of how he showed up for the family, from cooking, ironing, doing all of those tasks, that from an African, household is not considered as maybe being man enough.
Yeah.
And for me, that is one of the things that have really shaped and shifted the way in which I view marriage and the way just in general I view relationships as well.
Yeah, man. Oh, that's great, bro.
So I had both worlds.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things it's also seeing the shift and the transition from my dad having to be in this kind of a particular figure and how he has showed up, even in time. That picture that you show, it speaks of 3 generations.
Yes.
Speaks of my dad's generation, speaks of me and now my son.
Yeah.
So you get to see how certain things are shaped from that generation to the next. And also just seeing him in terms of how he is with my son.
Sure.
It makes my heart, filled with so much pride and joy.
That's great, man. You got historical, traditional African male figure, and your uncle, modern African male figure. What's the age gap between your dad and your uncle?
Jeez, my dad is 64 this year.
Okay.
And I think my uncle, he's 55, 54, 55, 50.
Sure.
No, my uncle, I think he's just 50 something in his 50s. Yeah.
That's cool, man. Sheesh, bro. Thank you so much again for those names, and we want to put those guys in here, and inspire, other men, especially young men, to hear those kind of stories. We don't want to just have those guys as stats. Sometimes we speak about these imaginary men who are there, who are showing up, and we just don't know their names, and we don't get to hear their stories. So we trying to just capture that, put it in a book, man, and have it passed down, and that one day your son will read it, and other sons one day will get to read this and know that no, these guys were actually there, and they lived, they existed. So you've been married for 6 years now.
Yeah, it's next month is actually gonna mark our 6-year anniversary.
Yeah.
Since me and my wife have been married.
Why did you get married?
Geez, it's a funny thing.
Sure.
I had this plan and vision growing up that no, man, by the age of 21, 22, 23, I want to make sure that I'm married.
Yeah.
When you have all these wild visions as a child growing up and you planned, and ultimately I did have that plan.
Sure.
And life didn't work out like that. And I think for me, it is the beauty of understanding that when the universe aligns, then that's when things start to come together.
Sure.
So the first day I met my wife, she doesn't even remember. I met her in a taxi.
Yeah.
And from the get-go, I knew.
Sure.
I'm not gonna push around the bushes when it comes to that one. I knew.
Yeah.
There was just something about her.
Sure.
And one of the key things was just that how authentic and how she carried herself.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that I've always said to myself that I don't want to marry an old traditional woman.
Yeah.
So she was embodying a lot of that modern woman, that the qualities that I was looking for in a person.
Sure.
That strong-willed, being self-independent, being very assertive. So that is one of the key things that really stood out for me.
Sure.
Especially the first day I met her. It's like this well-outspoken, closer woman.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stereotypes.
Was she shouting at the taxi driver?
No, she was not shouting, but just how assertive she was and how well-spoken and well-articulated she was. For me, those are one of the things that really captured me. And may I remind you as well, she had afro hair at the time. It was just something wearing a skirt. So there was just this beauty, this aura that just attracted me to her. So that was into 2008.
Yeah.
And I had my own fair share of having fun. And ultimately, when we started dating, it was in 2012. And that for me, it solidified that I know this is the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with.
Sure.
So it was then from then when she gave me, because I chased her for quite a very long time. So it was a chase from 2008, which some parts of it, she doesn't even remember. So it was a good 4 years chasing.
Did she tell you why she made you like run after her for 4 years?
Well, that is something that still remains a conversation that we're having,
Sure.
in terms of how come. And even till today, I don't have a very solid answer in terms of that. But I guess maybe she was not ready, because she's always been somebody that is career driven. When it came to relationships, no, she was not really much into relationships.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
But one thing that I find interesting, she always said she knew that she was going to marry a Tswana person. Very, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And here's this. Another funny thing that she also mentioned was that I looked too skinny at the time.
Yeah. She's like, she wanted indoor.
With
the dead bod.
So I think it was also that period of where a person was very young and very young, very much playful as well.
Sure.
Your sense of identity as a person was not even formed. So those are some of the key things, and which is why I mentioned earlier that when the universe aligns, then everything definitely does come together.
Sure.
So
that's great, man. As you're speaking, it's a conversation I've been having with a couple of guys, especially towards I think our late 20s into our 30s. This conversation became very prevalent, and it was this whole thing of wanting women who are assertive, women who challenge us, and so we look back at that desire and think to ourselves, yes, we were naive, man. Like the older we grow, we don't want no woman who's gonna challenge us, right?
well I beg to differ. I'm a different breed,
and that's why I wanted to ask you, because I'm like, probably in your line of work as well, you've probably met dudes who have a similar experience, who are like, because here's the thing. Again, you get guys who come from Pukeng, I come from Tembisa, and we're like, we don't want these traditional, olden days, old school kind of women. We want these, modern women, and we get to varsity. I want a chick who's gonna stimulate me intellectually, who's gonna challenge me. And then you get married, and you're like, sometimes I want a yes, yebo baba.
No, which is what I'm saying. I was very intentional. I needed a partner.
Sure.
And I think for me, that's where the biggest shift happened. I needed a partner.
Yeah.
And I didn't need, a lot of the influence and the contributions in terms of that made me who I am came from her wisdom as well.
Sure.
So I needed somebody who was going to bring a balance, which is why I was even quite intentional as well. I made sure that I wanted somebody that is educated as well.
Sure.
Sure. And even within both our development in terms of our career, so we've managed to give each other support. And that is for me one of the key important things, So I was shifting. So even in my thesis, a lot of the work that I was trying to do is I was just trying to unpack these gender roles that society has constructed in terms of them expecting what a man needs to be in terms of their gender roles. So for me, those are some of the things that I challenge.
Sure.
Because I can see how toxic they can become. And which is why we deal with a lot of issues now currently with regards to toxic masculinity. So for me, the shift had to happen at some point. So which is why I'm saying certain things, as much as they might be generational, but there reaches a point where certain generations, they come and they bridge that gap and they change things.
Sure. And that's where you stepped in.
That's where I stepped in. So that assertiveness, it's very much key. I mean, I can't explain it. And I think coming in the midst of coming in from yesterday being Women's Day, we need to also just acknowledge the power women have.
100.
They have the power to co-create. They have the power to bring something to life. So they are the foundation. They carry, they embody a lot of things So for me, I look at women and put them at a high regard. So which is why even when I said it's because I know how strong they can become. So I need to give credit where it's due.
Sure.
Their sense of leadership, how nurturing they can become as well in terms of how they lead and how they show up. For me, that is very much important. As much as we are saying we want to raise a particular kind of a man, we also need to acknowledge this. There's a particular kind of a woman that is shaped to become a particular way. So for me, that is something that is very much key. So as much as we are bridging the gap into modern marriage, modern, living, we need to also understand that both work needs to be done on both sides as well.
It's great, man. You in the psychology field, how long have you been doing the work that you're doing?
So it's been a very long time. I started my journey, started my undergrad in 2008 through an MMU, then did my master's 2013 at Rhodes University.
Sure.
So I've worked in clinical public health sector, private practice. I've worked within the higher tertiary also. So that has been a bit of the background. So a journey that started in 2013. Look at where I am now, and it was not a very easy journey, and I must say, it was a journey that required a person to grow, to evolve. So as much as it's a job, for me, it's not just any typical job, it's a calling. Having to be a psychologist is a calling. Initially, this is not a field that I had intended for myself, which is why I always speak about the universe, God. So everything had to be aligned. So for me, it's one of my greatest calling, my greatest purpose in life. So that's so I had to, and one of the key things that maybe a lot of people don't understand, there was a period in my career where things were stagnant. And that stagnation was brought about some of the work that I do, especially within African spirituality as well. So had a lot of blockages, unemployed for quite some time. Then as a result, I realized that, oh, by the way, I have a gift, So that for me is what brought a lot of shift into the work that I do as well. So I don't just only focus in terms of psychology. I also look in terms of how can I merge psychology and African spirituality as well. So which is what I'm saying. Earlier on, when I said I needed a partner, in days that I was down and out, she showed up. She showed up in ways and the showing up. And I think even when I'm building my brand and my career and moving forward, I remember where I come from. Because she played a very, very crucial part. And I think it also brings one of the key important elements of marriage is having to have a strong foundation. And that strong foundation, I don't just necessarily mean in terms of the basic ones that we speak in terms of communication. I speak more in terms of being rooted, in terms of understanding who you are as an African person as well. And building that layer to family, So the way in which her family and my family showed up during that period, it made me realize that, I am taken care of. And I think as much as the conversation is all about, husbands, I also just want to bring that element so that people get to understand.
It's great, bro.
You both of you have come from different families.
It's great,
so the foundations of where you come from, they play a very important role in terms of the success of your marriage. So during that difficult period, how the parents showed up from both sides of the family. So when I speak about a foundation, I just don't necessarily mean about just the common basic things. It's also about where you are rooted. My wife comes from a very, traditional family. And I came from a family where that exposure was not there. So being in a position where you can allow yourself to learn, where you can allow yourself to be flexible and be welcoming of another person's ways of doing things. Little did I know that having her will form as a basis of in terms of where I move forward in terms of being a traditional man as well. So which is why I say at the beginning I needed a partner, a partner where I can learn certain things. And remember, as partners, you bring different aspects into each other as well. So which is why I'm saying her coming from that background, it's what created also my sense of identity and sense of understanding when we speak about culture, when we speak about tradition, when we speak about being an African. And I think the influence only just didn't come just from her.
From her, yeah.
The context of also living in the Eastern Cape, having to engage with men, men who are well rooted.
Yeah.
So those for me has been some of the greatest things.
Sure.
Which is why earlier on at the beginning I mentioned that having to have walked this journey with my father where we are currently,
Sure, man.
and having to engage on those things as well in terms of what it means to be African. It has been something that has been uplifting.
Yeah. That's great, man. You've been married 6 years, and I've been married for 10 now.
Okay.
But most marriages don't get there. And you probably know more about this, but year 2, most marriages don't pass that.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation.
Yes.
Because I've had this similar conversation with a group of my friends. And one of the key things there in terms of why the 2 years are very, very crucial is a transition.
Yeah.
It's an adjustment.
Sure.
So people who don't realize that the adjustment just doesn't happen between you and your wife.
Yeah.
It also happens within the family as well. So if certain family dynamics are not resolved earlier on, so they tend to play a very important role in terms of some of the fights that comes within marriage as well.
Yeah.
And one other thing that is very much important that a lot of men don't even want to acknowledge is the changes that comes. You need to grow. So marriage requires some level of elevation as well. And when I say some level of elevation, it means your lifestyle changes. And often a lot of people, they're not even willing to change. And I always say one thing that is very much important. We cannot run away from change. It's constant. But people then tend to choose some of the things that they want to let go of.
Yeah.
So I remember having a conversation with one of my friends, and I'm saying, imagine you are a protector, which is one of the key important roles that I speak about in my thesis as well. You are a protector. So imagine being a protector. It's 2 a.m. You're not home.
Sure.
Who are you leaving your household
ADT.
to protect with? ADT. but I want to challenge that. There's a sense of comfort and safety when kids know that there's a father figure in
your wife
the
as
household.
Well. Yeah, sure.
So those are some of the key things that I've gotten to realize. That transition from marriage, living your old life, you need to transit. You need to adjust to a different kind of a role that you're not used to. So
what makes it hard for us as men to accept that change?
It's the culture.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the key important things that we don't realize is the culture in terms of how we are meant to think what it means to be a man.
To be a man, yeah.
So you come and we can even unpack also in terms of from certain experiences as well.
Yeah.
Where in terms of having to be a man, it's always been associated with a particular kind of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And a particular kind of way of being.
Yeah.
Women, jolo, going out, all of those things.
Bless her.
All of
Yes.
So one of the key things that I've found to be a challenge for many men is making that transition, understanding that life needs to change. So life doesn't no longer revolve around friends; it revolves around your primary home. So people struggle in terms of making that adjustment and that transition.
Sure.
And for other people, it can even take them years. And one of the key important thing also is a vision. You cannot be in a marriage and you lack a vision in terms of how you'd like to see your family become, where you are headed. And that vision tends to change, and people when they get into marriage they struggle in terms of having a vision.
Yeah.
So looking in terms of short term as opposed to long term as well.
Sure.
So for me, those have been some of the factors, and uncommunicated expectations and needs as well. People tend to not communicate. I expect my wife to do this. I expect my wife to know this. I expect my wife to know how I want sex. Those uncomfortable conversations, man, they don't have them.
Sure.
It then becomes certain uncommunicated expectations within. And again, the typical one, the gender roles as well. It also plays a huge factor, the financial aspects of things.
Sure.
It also forms the basis of why marriage, don't last within the first 2 years. Infidelity. I think we've normalized infidelity within us as men, and we struggle to even hold one another accountable as well. So those are some of the key things that I've gotten to pick up in terms of why marriage struggle within the first 2 years.
Sure.
And I'm gonna bring we are African beings. One of the other elements that come as well is having two people that are spiritually gifted, and there is some form of collusion that actually tends to take place. And another key element to that as well is not being grounded in a sense that how did you marry? So within an African context, we need to understand the certain processes and steps that needs to be taken so that it can solidify that marriage and that union. So that is some of the things that people tend to overlook. We tend to look at traditional ways of doing things as a way that is,
it's outdated.
It's outdated.
Yes.
But we then don't realize the practices of lobola, all of those processes, what do they really mean?
Yeah.
So if we speak about factors, it's the list, it's endless.
And maybe we could even sit on some of those. So for men, I think we should have, in your case, a father who's going to say to us at some point whether we are about to get married, or maybe it's just even there in how he grows you, right? And trains you to be a man, that at some point, maybe age 18 or 17 or whatever, and is like, hey, let me actually sit you down. In a couple of years, you might want to get married. Here's what it looks like to be a man.
Yeah.
So sitting down with his son and saying, you're going to have to change some of your ways. So prepare now, if you're going to get married at 25 and you're 18 now, right? You have some time for you to transition. And how you're going to explain to your friends that, hey, at age 25, I'm looking at getting married. So by 22, 23, guys, our relationship might, start becoming less in terms of the time that we spend, because now I'm trying to focus and adjust my mind, my time, et cetera, et cetera. So considering where the African family is, would that be a possible thing? Most of us come from families where our fathers are not there. How do we then maybe even not look at where we come from, but how do we fix it for the next generation? How do we fix it for your son?
So I think let me rather start here.
Sure.
I think one of the key things that we are forgetting is what fatherhood is. Okay. And in my thesis, that those are some of the teachings I wanted to share with people.
Sure.
Being a father, it's a matter of biology. Okay. But fatherhood is the actual practice of being a father, an actual father.
Sure.
So we must also remember that. So I'm saying we've forgotten about who we are. As African people, we grew up with abomalome, we grew up with uncles, boremogolo, borangwane. We grew up in a sense that being a child, it meant that you had many fathers.
Many fathers, man.
So we tend to also forget that the fixation becomes so much in terms of a biological father, as opposed to a man that actually played the fatherhood role.
Sure.
I do not take away the essence of blood, the connection, the importance of knowing your father.
Yeah.
Because at some point, every man yearns for that relationship. But I want us to also take into account the role that other men play in a child's life. And going back to what I've mentioned, that I can you wanted top 2 names. I can mention other men that played a very important role in terms of shaping the man that I am. People don't know that there's weekends that I used to wear overalls and I was at the farm, busy with the cows, all of those things.
Yeah.
There's a father also that played that role in terms of shaping and teaching those roles and responsibility as well. If you look at my hands, I'm a hard worker. But based on my profession, you wouldn't even tell.
Sure.
So that's why I'm saying, going back to that, we need to also understand that a father it's more than just issues around biology. And I think that is one of the key points that I wanted us to start the foundation.
That's great, bro.
And also understanding that we are shaped by many men and not necessarily just one man. it's a lot of responsibility to place.
On
That's
one
why
guy.
that's why a lot of the work that I do is rooted within the spirit of Ubuntu.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so we are a community,
Sure.
and I think the more we can start building that community and rebuilding that, then we're gonna see a man that is shaped by different men, and that on its own will start having to create the different conversations.
Sure.
And going back to the point that you've mentioned, that the conversation needs to start earlier on. Honest conversations in terms of, fine, you are 18, what are your future plans? What do you want to do? When do you want to get married? Then you start prepping a child developmentally in that regard, teaching them ways of being, teaching them the responsibility that comes with marriage. And one of the things that men don't also share, they've got wisdom, they've got experience I think my parents have been married for, this year marks 30.
Wow.
I think my late brother would have been, I'm 35, would have been 39 this year.
Wow.
So my parents would have been married for 38 years. So just imagine the knowledge of and the wisdom they carry when it comes to marriage. So some of the key things that are important to shaping you, they carry wisdom and experience. So can you see now we sitting, if we can have those conversations, you know, going with a child, for example, for camping, using those spaces as a way where you can rebuild a boy child, you know, where you can start teaching them about ways in terms of what it means to be a man and what marriage really entails. So I personally believe they carry a lot of wisdom. So in my growing up times, I used to enjoy hanging out with older men because there was a lot of wisdom that you would get from them.
That's great, man.
So spot on in terms of that conversation. It needs to start early. We shouldn't wait for a child to say, well, I want to get married before we say, well, we need to start building.
Yeah, that's great, bro. I've enjoyed the fruits, the privilege and the blessing of having many men around me, particularly in my experience in the church. That's where, you know, I kind of experienced that and got all of that. And I think for me, the blessing was, one, it was intergenerational. So it wasn't just one age group, but it was multiple generations of men, different races as well. You know, so all of that experience came in, which was such a blessing, man. You know, and part of why I started this podcast is that I enjoy that, and I realize not many of us enjoy that, because again, we move from the village, we move from the hood, and we come live in the suburbs where everything is so isolated, you know, and then everyone is also insulated. So we isolated, but then we want to keep to ourselves as well, because that's the culture there, you know. And so then the spirit of Ubuntu, I'm like, where do I even exercise that? Where do I practice that? You know what I mean? Because I go to the mall, I see an older guy. If I talk to him, his first instinct is probably like, "This kid is going to rob me. What's this thing?" Right? And to even ask him, "You're an older guy. Maybe I've seen you. We come to the same spa. I just need to hang out with you as an old man." He'll probably be like, "Hey, what do you want? What's going on?" You know what I mean? And so for me, it's part of the reason why we want to put this book together, because we like where we live now. Geography has kind of made it slightly harder for us to kind of live some of these things out, you know, which are beneficial for us, and they're going to help the future generation of young men. But it's like, man, how do we find pockets? How do we find other ways, you know, to kind of exercise that? Another thing you mentioned in that list is infidelity, and how we've made it part of who we are as men. I wanted, again, I've had this thought for a long time, and I'm glad you kind of spoke about, you know, some of the just African practices. And I've always wondered how the African man has moved to a point where infidelity is such a just, you know, like second nature, where I think 2-3 generations back, that thing was frowned upon. Yes, it's not like people weren't cheating, but it was frowned upon, you know, so much that if you would, you know, there would be practices that were in place to discourage that kind of thing. When I think of the, you know, the practice of intlawulo, or paying damages, you know. So I'm like, if you go now have a child out of wedlock, and you have to pay damages. It was also a signal to the rest of us as young men that don't
Yeah.
do that thing, right? So it's also a way to correct something, but to also preserve how we then grow a community, grow a society, grow the family. And again, it's a warning to the rest of the other younger men: don't do that thing, right? Then you fast forward now, it's like Kumjola is just part of our lives. I'm like, where did that? Is it because of us moving? Is it because of us being modernized? Like what's the thing, right?
So I wanna share a bit of wisdom
Yeah, yeah,
on the issue around damage. Then I'll
sure.
come to that point that you've mentioned. We also need to understand that the part of damage was your family coming to acknowledge that we have a child,
Mm, mm,
and it's so that two families
mm,
they know each other,
sure,
so that a child doesn't grow up not knowing a family and where they come from.
sure,
So imagine that you got somebody pregnant, your family never came, they never acknowledged.
mm,
So can you
sure.
see that this is also a form of building a relationship?
Yeah.
So that should there be issues around access to a child, that bridge has been built.
Mm,
And the part of intlaulo is not just only for family, there's also spiritual reasons and purposes for that.
sure.
So those are some of the things a lot of people lack a sense of understanding in
Yeah.
terms of that.
Sure.
So issues around infidelity, it's a lengthy conversation. I have a very close friend who's more like a brother. We constantly have a lot of conversations around that.
Sure.
And I like to also give context to a lot of men.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of men tend, but the popular word that is used, "Monna ke selepe," people don't understand the foundation and where that came from. So we come from colonial time where there's war.
Sure.
So remember, if there were 50 men that would go to war, maybe 5 comes back.
Come back, man. Yeah.
We used to live in tribes.
Yes.
Then what would happen? We still need to go back to war and we need to go to battle. So we then need to understand why that concept came about. Okay? Then men used to procreate, used to have kids everywhere. Everywhere.
Sure.
It was accepted maybe during that time.
Sure.
We also need to understand that we need to transform as individuals.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the key important things about being human is we're constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So we had to evolve with time as well.
Sure.
Coming to issues around infidelity, issues around the popular one, polygamy, which a lot of men tend to use that as a as a reason behind that well, a man can connect with many women, but there are no emotions.
Sure.
The minute we say there are no emotions, we need to be worried.
Yeah.
I want us to explain. I want to explain something that we are both rational and emotional beings. But the minute as a man you struggle to tap into emotion, then it means there's an issue there.
Sure.
So we are born like that as human. However, we are socialized in a particular way as well. So the socialization also play a very crucial point, in terms of issues around infidelity, which is why I mentioned earlier that we've normalized it based in terms of how we are socialized. So certain social constructs as well, they create a particular kind of a man. And I'll go back to even as far back as my own experience growing up. Having many women, it used to be seen as uyindoda, you are a man, umunna, in essence. But we never took into account the emotional impact that has on women. And the spiritual impact that it has on you.
And
as
you
a
as
man.
a man, yeah. Sure.
So a lot of men don't understand that infidelity is also about energy.
Yeah.
So the more you find yourself living with different women, you are giving out something, and you don't know what you're bringing and what you're taking in as well. Those are some of the conversations that a lot of men that are not ready to have.
Sheesh.
Okay.
Sheesh.
So when we speak about infidelity, we need to also just take into account the emotional impact and the spiritual impact it also has on an individual.
Yeah, man. And I think for me, again, that's a very interesting and ongoing conversation, because as we were chatting and even off camera, like for me, yeah, I mean, again, I've always said on this podcast that having having the same worldview with your spouse or your partner is so important, because that's the thing that's going to ground you, that's going to root you, you know. So when we disagree on what to do with this clock, we can both go back to what are our values, what are our principles, what are our fundamentals, right? And where do we live from? And so I've always found it hard, and I'm glad I'm sitting with you. I've always found it hard, man, and wrestled with, again, just from an African perspective, and particularly even African spiritual perspective, how it's reinforced, you know, not to practice infidelity. Because again, from my worldview, man, the Bible says don't do it, right?
Yeah.
It's like, listen, God says don't do this thing. It's wrong. Here are the reasons. Done, right? And then I've always said to guys, man, how do we, again, generationally, as much as we knew that people were, but it feels like now in the African community, this thing is more. And I don't know if it's because we have more money, we have more access. We, again, don't live community. Because I'm like, before, like, we'd know, man. Kindates, mang, you have a family 2 streets away. What are you doing here in the evening? But now it's like, bro, you can live in Bryanston, and, you know, you're on Tinder, you're linking up with somebody from the Val. You go make a baby there, you leave, and you're flying with work, you in the Eastern Cape, and, you know, and there's just no sense of accountability and no rooting again, you know, where I'm like, yes, this thing is getting out of hand, man.
So there's a book by Leroy.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of it.
Sure.
But it speaks about a lot of men's experiences with what we regard as trauma. Okay. One of the things that we also don't realize is that people, that's why I said, if you're a man and you say, you know, sex is more physical, then we need to be worried. An issue,
yeah.
We are emotional beings. So there's a lot of men that carry a lot of traumas. They carry a lot of emotional pain and certain unmet needs. But I'm going to try to bring a bit of psychology to it.
Sure.
And maybe explain something. As human beings, we are born with impulses.
Yeah.
You know, so Freud calls it the id. Okay, so which is the impulses that we have, in the sense of I want to have sex, I want food. Yeah. We are all born with certain, it's nature. Then we have what we regard as a superego, which is our moral compass. Certain individuals, they have what we regard as an underdeveloped superego. So that critical voice, they say, but this is wrong. This is, you know, some other people is underdeveloped.
Sure.
Okay. Sure. And that can also be traced in terms of certain childhood wounds, certain unmet needs. So we have a lot of men that are dating a lot of women because they're trying to fill up a void, an emotional void through sex. Then sex then becomes a tool as a way of trying to fill, as a way also of trying to run away from certain traumas that you carry as an individual. So which is something that is very much important. Then your ego becomes your behavior as a person, how you then decide to behave. So if certain things are underdeveloped, especially with the id, so that then speaks about your development as a child, the sense of being tolerant, to be able to wait an extra 15 minutes before you get a feed. That plays a very important point in terms of how you get to regulate what we would regard as your impulses later on in life. So which is why I'm saying certain developmental stages or milestones, if they're not met, then chances are you're going to struggle. And everything will then goes back in terms of the primary care relationships, the relationship that you have with your primary caregivers, which plays a very significant role in terms of the kind of man you become. Which is why they say many men, they marry their mothers. So which is also another conversation. A lot of men, ultimately, they tend to marry women who were similar to their mothers, because of certain experiences as well. So hopefully I managed to give you a bit of a context of understanding issues of infidelity. Also bringing together in terms of how men are socialized. You are socialized in that way. Then you have all these other psychological issues that you battle with. Then all of those, remember now, it then becomes a mixture, a combination of many things. That's when you realize that a lot of men need a lot of healing. There's a lot of healing that needs to take place.
How do we get there? Because my follow-up question would have been, So when do we give room for taking accountability and being responsible? Yes, there's things that might have happened to me I didn't have control over, but I still have agency. I'm the same guy who goes and applies for a job, and I can wake up at 7 to be at work at 9. So I know what I'm doing at some point. When do I take responsibility and accountability? Because it goes back to how we started this conversation. 2 years of marriage, things get hard.
Yeah.
People don't make choices, or sometimes just abdicate and don't want to take any responsibility. And then you've been married for 2 years and suddenly you bail out. When do we say, I mean, this is you a psychologist. When do you sit with somebody and you're like, my dog, you need to take responsibility, right?
So I think it comes with having to be ready as a person.
Okay.
You can have as much conversations with a person up until they get to realize their behavior. Then there's little less that you can do.
Sure.
So if I see my behavior as something that is okay and something that is normal, then even if we have the conversation, even this conversation might not be engaging enough, you'd say, but what was Karabo and Black saying? So, but I personally believe there is at some point where certain lessons they will make you to realize certain things. That's why we have even many people that move from one marriage to the next, because you haven't learned the lesson. And remember, a lesson will keep repeating itself up until you've actually learned it. So it's a matter of you as a person. Are you ready to grow? Are you ready to change? Are you ready to take accountability? And at times life will just throw lessons after lesson. And up until you learn, then you'll repeat the same cycle.
Take the thing,
So that's what I regard as a life event cycle. Part of a life event cycle, it means there will always be certain triggers. There will always be certain thoughts and feelings that you have, your urges as a person, your behavior leading to consequences. And it's a cycle.
Sure.
You're repeating the very same cycle in your life. And before you know it, it becomes a normalized behavior.
Sure. So I'm married for 2 years now. I'm watching this thing. What conversations should I be having now with my wife to help us cross over so that we're not statistics? Yeah.
So I think maybe even prior to that, any person who is maybe wants to get married, you're thinking of marriage, so the basic thing that needs to start it's basic counseling. Basic counseling. Me and my wife went for marital counseling. And in that session, it gave us an opportunity to start also looking at potential harms that might come into our marriage. How can we resolve those within family dynamics as well? Who are the people potentially that you think they might bring issues in your marriage? Key important things.
But how do you navigate that one? Because family is a big thing.
Boundaries.
We black.
Yeah. And for me that is
Rakhadi doesn't care about boundaries. Rakhadi has always been the matriarch here who tells us what to do.
So which is why it's always important to understand the kind of family that you're marrying into.
Sheesh, man.
So a lot of people don't realize that it's significant and the role that plays.
Yeah.
So I fortunately, I think it's not even everyone. Fortunately, I came from a household where my siblings never had any issues with my wife. But I had to implement boundaries.
Sure.
Part of implementing those boundaries, if there's anything, I'd rather hear it from my wife.
Yeah.
Go have a conversation with my wife. Those are things that I've been consistently doing. So it also means that as much as we speak about those boundaries, it requires consistency. If you can't do that, then I'm not going to show up.
Sure.
I need to be clear.
Yeah.
This is my foundation. This is my family.
Yeah.
So when it comes to family, there needs to be clear financial boundaries, time boundaries, physical, many boundaries, 6 different types of boundaries. So it's a matter of also identify whether you've got healthy, unhealthy boundaries with your family. So
what are those 6 boundaries?
So I'm gonna try to remember them. Okay. We've got your physical boundary.
Okay.
We've got your sexual boundary. We've got your emotional boundary. We've got your time boundary. We've got material boundary. and forgot the other one, but there's a sixth one as
Okay.
well. So even things as much as material possessions as well, family needing having to understand that, well, I'm not going to borrow you my car, but I can borrow that to my wife. Boundaries.
Yeah.
Siblings having expectations.
Yes.
So we need to reach a point where we identify the boundaries that we have with our families.
Yeah.
And if there are no boundaries, then they're gonna do as they please. Chances are they can even tell your wife where to get off. They can speak to her in a way that is inappropriate because there's no boundaries. Boundaries that needs to start with you as a person. Same to my wife.
Yeah.
There needs to be clear boundaries, vice versa. Okay. And some of the conversations that people also need to have is issues around finances.
Yes.
If and I have an issue with this one, that a man is only seen as a provider before anything else.
Yeah, sure.
So which is why in my thesis I speak about many roles a man plays.
Yeah.
So we need to be in a position where we understand, is this a partnership or am I here to be a provider?
To be a provider, yeah. I always say that a man doesn't just provide financially, but you provide spiritually, you provide the joy of the house, provide vision, you know.
There's a lot of
There's
things.
a lot, bro. Yeah.
And like we are having this conversation. How can a person avoid? I mean, the basic thing, the people that you surround yourself with, they are your wealth. Similar to that, if you're still hanging around with same people that are doing things that will impact or affect your marriage, then you need to revisit those things. And often one of the things that I've realized is that people are not ready to let go.
Sure.
So letting go of certain friends that no longer serve you.
Yeah.
We need to understand that as we evolve, we need to let go of certain relationships. It happens. Some of them they even fall away. Maybe some of them might be because of your toxic traits as a person. But we need to be in a position where we are ready to transform and to let go of certain habits and certain patterns as well. One of the common things that destroys a lot of marriage is the going out part. Lack of communication, putting friends first, So and I'll give an example. In my case, I've got 3 kids.
Sure.
So meaning each one their own individual attention. I've got a wife, I've got siblings. So you then realize that, because remember, we move from a transitional point where life starts being more about friends.
Yes.
Then it starts shifting from that being more about family.
Yes.
Which is what I'm saying. It's a process. And if you are unable to adjust to that process and you're still stagnant in terms of putting more emphasis on friends, then what about your immediate family? You require date nights with your wife. The romance doesn't stop.
Doesn't stop.
We need to understand that the romance doesn't have to stop.
Yeah.
Sexual needs, they change.
Yep.
We need to communicate those.
Yeah.
And also being in a position where you can communicate your needs and expectations as a person. But people struggle to even begin to identify what do I need.
I mean, if you're a man and you already believe that sex is more physical and less emotional, you've even blocked yourself from being emotional with your wife.
Yeah.
And just talking about your needs and how you feel about certain things, How do you help guys through that?
So it takes a lot, man.
Yeah.
It takes a lot in therapy.
Sure.
So there's a lot of deep inner child, work that we do in terms of healing certain wounds, if there is, and setting issues around boundaries, and just a shift in just your mindset as a person in terms of the kind of life that you want to live. The life that we see mostly is constructed by a particular narrative within society. So shifting all of that as well. So I cannot give you a step-by-step approach because everything will always depend in terms of what people are presenting with. So whatever people are presenting with is going to be case by case.
Sure, man.
Yeah. So it's something that is doable. I just want to say to a lot of men, it's something that is doable, but you just have to be willing to put in the work.
Man. Yeah.
So when you speak about the 2 years,
so
the 2 years of marriage was very difficult.
Yeah.
Because of
for you guys.
Okay. So there was a lot of transition, not necessarily family, but just adjusting to the life, the friends, and already we had a son. So just already you are not just taking up just a husband duty now. You are taking the responsibility as well of being a father.
Father, man.
You know, so the transition that comes with all of that. So you're managing a lot of dynamics all at the same time. And also the spiritual battles that comes.
Yeah.
We need to also acknowledge that the minute you take a covenant of being married, it then means that the spiritual battles are also gonna come.
Yeah.
So where there's light, darkness will also follow. So also, which is why I always say that if you're not grounded as a person spiritually, and spiritually I'm not encompassing maybe African spirituality or anything, but it's all about your belief as a person. You know, if you're not grounded in that regard, maybe praying, doing the inner work, all of those things, they also form a very important part in terms of issues that people battle with in marriage. So spiritually, if there isn't a form of being grounded and understanding that, well, we can't be arguing about a spoon that it means there's
Clearly
something,
there's
another
else.
force that is there. So we need to also just be mindful also in terms of how the spiritual things also play a very significant role in terms of that as well. So first to marriage, you will have a lot of spiritual battles. And if you have unresolved issues with exes in the past, you haven't closed certain chapters, we can't be moving forward by
still looking
back. The lifestyle, I'm still, we need to close a lot of things. So those are some of the things that I've gotten to see. People are still lingering in the past. And the past has a way of coming back. And when it comes back, it will hit with a particular lesson. You know? So I think for me those are some of the key important things.
Yeah, that's great, man. And I think it is such an important note to encourage people to approach this soberly and think about it, you know, in a very brutally honest way. Because I think whether it's because of movies or, you know, how we were raised, we just tend to have this Hollywood version of what marriage is going to be. And you get in and you're like, I'm actually dealing with a real human who's complex with their own emotions, dreams, desires. You know, she wanted she thought she'd be somewhere in her life at this point, and I come in, I might have interrupted that. She's adjusting as much as I'm adjusting, you know, and I think maybe you could speak into this. People don't realize that's actually what marriage is, this whole thing of adjusting. Because sometimes people hear us speak about having to navigate the challenges of marriage and they think, well, that's probably a component or a box somewhere. But there's this whole other area of marriage where it's just fun and amazing. And I'm like, no, all of it is together.
Yeah.
All of it is together. And there's a way in which you should look at it that way, right? Because that's going to be you guys for as long as you stay married. There's just going to be this mess of beauty and chaos.
And maybe just adding more onto what you've mentioned, what we don't realize is two people coming from two different worlds. And when you're coming from two different worlds, you carry different traumas, different experiences. So now you're bringing this concussion into your marriage. What will then happen? So there's a lot of negotiation that really takes place. And if you don't have conflict management skills, it's a problem. If when you always want to attack,
which university do we get those from? Please help us.
those are what I regard as things that are fundamental to build your EQ as a person. Your IQ is set, but remember your EQ is things that you can learn even in your 50s.
In your 50s,
and I think for me, people need to invest in that. People need to invest in terms of building their emotional EQ that forms part of which around conflict management, you know, boundaries, communication skills, personal hygiene, many other things. So which is what I'm saying, if only people could invest in and not necessarily only go for therapy. There's a lot of spaces that are now created that can help you to enhance and build you to become a better version of who you are. So if two people with traumas coming in, and if two people are not willing to work through those dynamics, and maybe you can work through them together, because we tend to split quite regularly. We tend to see marriages either good or bad, but it's both.
It's both, man. Yeah.
So when two people are coming from different worlds, you're coming with the good and the bad. how do we work through the bad so that we can have a happy marriage? And happiness also understanding that it's not every day.
It's not every day, man.
So the Hollywood perfect marriage, romance, going on vacations, there's moments of where there's no money. Financially, it's a struggle. So what do you then do? If you married a man and say, well, a man must provide, and he cannot,
He loses his job. What happens?
What then happens? So we need to reevaluate really the standards of marriage and what it means to get into a union and get into a marriage.
Yeah. As you look at our country, considering the space that you're in and occupy, do you have hope for husbands?
Well, I do.
Yeah.
I do. And I think for me this is where the hope comes in.
Yeah.
Our children.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So for me, I get excited, especially when I look at my kids. And I said to my wife, and I was like, my girls, these girls, they're not gonna struggle. They will know the soft life because they've got both mom and dad.
Sure.
And for me, I think that is the beauty of having a complete household.
Yeah. Yeah.
So looking at my son, how now I model certain behavior to him, it will shift his world perspective. And I think that's where my hope lies mostly. And I think when they generally say the children are the future, it's literally that in that essence that we need to understand whatever behavior that you model, your kids are looking at you.
Sure.
They're seeing you as a role model. So we need to be very much mindful of what we teach and what we say with our kids. So maybe asking yourself as a person, I like it. There was a men's conference we had, and there was some takeouts from Shomla that I took out. It's that as a man, you need to know some of the generational curses that you're fighting.
Yeah.
That is very much that is key because you then make sure that you don't pass those on to your kids.
Yeah.
So your kids needs to be the better version of you.
Sure. Break those habits, man.
We need to break those habits. So you need to then fundamentally ask yourself, what version of a man do I want to co-create? Do I still want to co-create the same version of me? Well, I think there can be a better version of me. And I see that through the lens of my kids, which is something that is very much important. So when God gives kids in a marriage, in a union, there is a reason for that. And this way they're saying kids are gifts.
Sure. That's great, man. What would you say to husbands who are hopeless, finding it hard, and particularly around obviously mental health, which is something that we all becoming very well aware of now, but there's still a taboo, there's still a tension. I don't want to appear as a weak guy. I'm gonna go pay to sit in front of Karabo and talk about how I feel. Come on, dog. Let's go play golf. Let's just go drink. Let's and I'm like, man, there's probably more benefits in you actually working on just how you think, how you feel, how you show up, how you aware of who you are in spaces is probably gonna be more beneficial than you just going to find stress relievers. Right?
So there was a talk I gave, man. I think it was last year or the year before. And I was just sharing in terms of the context of, you've mentioned something that was key also that I'm also trying to connect with that. You've mentioned that when you get to Joburg, you don't have that community. When you go back to the villages, back in the days, there used to be a council.
Yeah.
Where so where that was some form of counseling. It might not have been from a professional point of view, but that was a system that was there. So we need to bring back those kinds of systems that can be there, which is why I like what you've mentioned, building that community for men so that they know where they can go for certain support and certain resources. So like we've mentioned also, mental illness is a result of many things that are unresolved, many emotions. And if you are a man and you've always been socialized not to tap into emotions, at some point they will catch up.
Sure.
So we need to reach a point where we access these resources. Men's conference, sitting with a psychologist, these kinds of podcasts, they go a long way in terms of assisting people navigate certain ways of life. So people need to realize that they do need some form of counseling. So for me, If it was possible, but given the context of our country and how there isn't too much investment in terms of issues around mental illness, then it's problematic. The reason why I'm saying there needs to be a lot of investment is because of the generational traumas that comes. We are a traumatized nation.
Yeah.
That is something that we need to acknowledge.
Sure.
That trauma that your great grand gets passed on through what? Through behavior, through how you are raised as a child.
Sure.
And it starts to form and formulate a kind of a person. So for me, I do encourage a lot of men to go for therapy. And I've said with a lot of men in therapy, been to a number of men's conferences. Those are very good spaces to build. And remember, therapy is not just to speak about just only issues around that EQ, that emotional intelligence, those skills that you need, conflict management. How can you process and understand certain ways so that even when you get home, you have that kind of a skill. So we need to uplift ourselves and we need to invest in ourselves as men, something that we don't do much regularly. We need to invest in ourselves.
Sure, man. That's great, man. And I think when we hear investment, sometimes we think money, but it's, there's human resource, man. There's brothers you can get around, and the quality of brothers that you're with, that's an investment, because you can take your time and invest it in guys who are just gonna always take you to the club, or you can take that time and invest it in guys who actually will build you up. There's an illustration I saw this guy mention where his grandmother was telling him about the importance of friends and even the kind of quality friends that you keep, and so she used the hand, and she said, imagine if you the thumb, and if you put your thumb in the rest of your fingers, how many fingers do you have? Well, 4 fingers. And so those are the 4 friends that cover you, So she's like, don't try and invest your time in finding 20 friends, because sometimes that's impossible because of time. You have responsibilities, etc., etc. Your father, your husband, you work, but just 4 guys, that you'll put your time in, who will cover you and invest you. But even if you flip the analogy around, your one thumb can cover the 4 fingers. So be the friend who will be there for these other 4 guys, right? But make sure that there's just a handful of guys that you can find, 2, 3, 4 maybe, and that's probably what you can handle, humanly speaking and realistically. But find those men, invest in them, let them invest in you, time-wise, that they're praying for you, you're walking with them, you guys, you're speaking about your spirituality, not just finances and where else you can, what stocks to buy, but you're thinking, hey man, how's my conflict resolution skills? How am I, doing with my wife sexually? How am I doing with my kids in terms of building them and spending time with them? That you guys are having those kind of conversations, man. So I just wanted to say that, because sometimes, people hear the word investment and they're like, I need to go, I don't have money. That's another thing I need to, and it's like, no, I think there's other ways that you can invest, man, in who you are, and your well-being, so bro, really appreciate you, man. And thank you. Like, there's so many things you've challenged me personally on, and I know you've definitely challenged the audience on. Let's end it here. Your 8-year anniversary is coming in a month's time.
Six
anniversary. 6, man.
So August, it I think the 12th of August.
Yes.
12. Yeah, it was 12 years since we've been together.
Wow.
So next month on the 29th, it will mark 6 years being married.
What are you doing?
No, we haven't planned.
Okay. I was putting you on the spot now. As your wife is watching this, she's like, yeah?
Yeah, there's a lot of transitional things that are happening in the background, in just our own personal things.
Sure.
But we one of the things that I've adopted from her, it's just always celebrating, even if it's something that is small.
Sure.
So definitely there will be something
Something
special lined up.
Yeah.
Plus it's a Sunday.
Yeah.
So meaning that at least the person has the weekend.
Sure.
Embrace. So I was saying to a lot of my friends that I wouldn't mind getting married again. I wouldn't mind.
Sure.
And which forms a very much important point of always celebrating. Celebrate the smallest of wins in your marriage. If you overcome a particular situation
Sure.
that was a barrier and you've always celebrate that. So we as men, we struggle to celebrate. Because maybe it's because we are not celebrated enough. So, but I always say, try to celebrate any small win. If it so happens that you had a very rough year and things are just, growing and it's becoming this beautiful thing, take a moment to celebrate that.
Man.
So for me, it's as much as it's 6 years, there's lots to celebrate.
It's great, bro.
Right. No, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah. No,
It's been
thanks,
a great
man.
pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you to your wife, man. You could be with her now and the kids, but you're here. So I don't take her for granted. So please, man, do send our regards and our appreciations when you get home.
No, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We
Thanks a lot,
really
man.
thank her. And thank her again for, you sharing part of your guys' story. So it's not, you're not, like you said, you're not a husband in isolation. You're a husband because of her. You're a father because of your 3 kids. So it's their story, man. So thank you for sharing their story with us as well.
Okay. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This was certainly great. Opened up a lot of conversations, and we'd like to get your thoughts. So please do leave a comment at the bottom. Let's engage. Let's find out where you guys are and how some of these conversations, and particularly this one, has shaped you. And is helping you to see things in a different way, or even ask different questions about where you are in your marriage, in your relationship. Especially if you're a husband, how are you seeing things differently in light of this conversation that we had? So thank you so much for tuning in, man. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe. Hit the notification bell. We drop every Wednesday at 11:30. This is where we are. We'll see you on the flip side after this. All right. Cheers.